on Acast and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Rebalance with Kamal Santamaria.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Rebalance. You know, around a month ago, just after the 47th President of the United States was inaugurated, I recorded an edition of this podcast and I said some things. Things like this.
Look, convention is not Trump's strong suit. And back in 2016, that meant we all went a bit crazy over every unconventional thing he did. This time, though, it needs a different approach, deciding which of his claims or ideas or actions truly demand our attention.
Now, believe me when I say I meant that. We have the benefit of experience. It's not the same as last time. And we have it within our own power to be more prudent about our Trump intake. But there's two things I hadn't considered. One is just how hard it is to step back from everything that's happening in Washington. It really is difficult. And two, it's definitely not the same as last time. It's worse.
Rebalance with Kamal Santamaria.
President Donald Trump is defending the Department of Government Efficiency's dismantling of federal government agencies and the mass firings of federal workers.
President Trump insists everybody loves his plan to take over the Gaza Strip, move Palestinians out and rebuild it as a Riviera of the Middle East.
Trump went so far as to falsely claim that somehow Ukraine started the war.
And that is just the tip of the iceberg. 4 weeks into a 208-week presidency, and Donald Trump has upended the United States and the whole world in a way that even the 2017 version of himself would be surprised at. For example, he has pardoned 1,500 rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, withdrawn the US from the Paris Climate Accords and the World Health Organization, renamed the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, tried to end birthright citizenship, placed a freeze on federal funding while unelected civilian Elon Musk set about firing federal employees and closing down agencies like USAID, declared that he wants Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada to all become part of the United States, ended federal DEI programs, fired 15 inspectors general, imposed and then removed 25% tariffs on Colombia, banned transgender people from the military, ended work from home for federal employees, imposed 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on Chinese goods, announced a plan for the US to take over the Gaza Strip, appointed himself chairman of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, set 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports, banned reporters from the White House for not using the name Gulf of America, announced a plan to end the war in Ukraine without involving Ukraine, and blamed President Zelensky for the war, which actually began with a Russian invasion. And even then, there's a whole lot more that's happened. In hindsight, my comments 4 weeks ago were, at best, hopeful.
But this isn't just on the media, it's on any one of us. If you don't like Donald Trump, then don't watch him. Ignore the media coverage. Make a decision not to click that latest video on social media, or to reshare it with your followers, or send it to friends in a WhatsApp group. I'm not saying you should be ignorant to what's happening, just be judicious.
Well, if anyone out there's managed to be judicious in the past month without crawling under a rock, then colour me impressed. So how does one, in the case of this Trump administration, separate the proverbial wheat from the chaff? How do you decide which things really matter? Well, maybe flipping things around might help. Instead of looking at this big pile of actions which have been taken and thinking, well, how will these affect democracy, or freedom of speech, or international relations? Why not go the other way? Take one of those big issues and see how, or indeed if, those actions are truly impacting them. Let's try international relations.
It's called the Gulf of America now. It's not called the Gulf of Mexico any longer. I have the right to do it just like we have the right to do Mount McKinley, and nobody's even challenging that.
Well, they're not challenging it because Mount McKinley's on American soil, and the government of the day certainly can change the name if it wants to. But it can't change the name of an international body of water, and it can't force anyone else to comply with its demands. It's a non-issue, and most countries are just ignoring it. Compare it, though, to these comments from the US Vice President at the Munich Security Conference.
Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump.
What J.D. Vance was saying, among many other things, is that culture war issues and a perceived suppression of free speech, they are Europe's biggest problems, and that the US just isn't interested in its own allies if they won't take the same view that he and Trump have. At a conference which is about security, it was pretty extraordinary and blew away all sorts of norms. It actually pivoted the US away from the post-war alliances. Here's Samantha de Bendon, Associate Fellow at the Chatham House think tank, speaking to France 24.
And J.D. Vance made a scathing attack on European policies, on internal politics of a European country. This is also a departure from an unwritten rule in US diplomacy, which is internal politics stay at home. The US does not bring its internal political problems to the outside world and does not criticize the internal political problems or not of its allies. And there was not one single mention of the real threat facing Europe and the Euro-Atlantic alliance today, which is Russia.
Ah yes, Russia. Russia, which invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, but which now is going to be part of a peace effort with Donald Trump to end the war, an effort which won't actually involve Ukraine. And not only has President Trump been saying that he trusts President Vladimir Putin, he's also claimed Ukraine started the war and that its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is a dictator. Jill Doherty, adjunct professor at Georgetown University and former CNN Moscow bureau chief, couldn't quite believe it.
This is really a shocking development because it is putting all of the onus, no criticism on Russia whatsoever. In fact, as we see, Russia got a lot today. And telling Zelensky that he started the war, this is precisely what Vladimir Putin says, that it was the Ukrainians who started it. But I don't know, we have to beat a dead horse here. It's quite obvious. The proof is there. The video is there. And the world really does know that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine.
So, in conclusion, pivoting away from Europe, siding with Russia, and hanging Ukraine out to dry, these things matter because they will change global alliances. They will create tension and fractures between old allies and will centralize power around a few men who either are dictators or act like one. Let's try another big issue. Let's say, the threat to America's democratic institutions.
You're watching the unraveling of our democracy. It's not about to happen. It is happening right now.
This is something you hear a lot, that democracy is under threat, that democratic institutions are being dismantled, and that America is sliding towards authoritarianism, if not a dictatorship. That's pretty heavy stuff. And there is no doubt Donald Trump's words and, more importantly, his actions are pointing towards that very slide. But is the US in a constitutional crisis? Consider this from Mark Elias, an elections attorney for the Democratic Party.
To me, it is not a constitutional crisis when the executive branch, the President of the United States, does something illegal and it is stopped, right? I mean, the system of checks and balances works when one branch oversteps and they are stopped from overstepping by the other co-equal branches of government. What makes it a constitutional crisis is when the branches of government are unable to contain it. We are starting to see signs that some within the executive branch are suggesting that maybe they don't need to abide by court orders. Now, if we get to that, if we get to the point in which you have an administration that says we don't need to abide by lawful orders of federal judges, then we will be in a full-blown constitutional crisis.
So if there's any consolation there, it's that America is not in a constitutional crisis. It's just really close to one. You're right, there's very little consolation there. But just remember, and it's what we always try to remind you here, that the big phrases and declarations and headlines aren't necessarily the full story. In fact, generally they aren't. Look for the detail. look to see what really matters, and then decide if you're going to freak out about it.
The Balance. Journalism without agenda.
Yeah, we've probably all been doing a level of freaking out in the last month, and it's a case of keeping that in check, I think, because there's a long way to go in this presidential term. And that is it for this week's Rebalance. I swear we'll talk about something other than Donald Trump at some stage. I just can't tell you when that will be yet. In the meantime, do get in touch. Social media is at The Balance feed. You can email me directly, kamal@thebalance.website, or you can drop something in the comments section on our YouTube channel if you like. Our podcast is uploaded there every week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading. Thanks for subscribing. It's really helpful when you do all of those things. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Rebalance is a production of the Balance.website and is brought to you by Acast. For more, visit shows.acast.com/rebalance.